Hello and welcome to another Access VFX podcast, episode 35. This is our first special podcast with the team from Chicago, the Access VFX Chapter over in the Windy City. So big, make some noise, Come on. Okay. So as this is a Chicago special, it seemed right and proper to have one of our big hitters. I use that term a lot on the podcast. Big hitters from the Chicago chapter, Kate Soczka. Have I pronounced that name right, Kate?
Yeah, very good.
Amazing. From Carbon VFX. So I'm going to hand over to Kate to take over the helm. I'm going to disappear through kind of the virtual back door and leave you to it. This episode is about freelancing and freelancing tips, whether it be the current thrust of freelancing or freelancing within the current climate, the current lockdown. So Kate, I'm going to hand over to you and I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Simon. Hi, everybody. Like you said, we're calling this episode Freelancing Tips, and we'll be talking about how to become a freelancer, pros and cons of freelance versus staff position, exciting stuff like taxes and insurance, networking, promoting yourself and your reel, and hopefully these panelists will share some stories about successes and failures, since those are just as important. So yeah, we'll get right into introductions. I'm Kate Soczka, head of production at Carbon. I've been in the industry for about 15 years already. And I'm really happy to be working with Access VFX, planning live events, studio tours, networking opportunities, and now podcasts and videos. And then I'll throw it over to Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan Urban. I'm a VFX supervisor and compositor, and I've been in the industry now going on 14 years.
And Katrina?
Oh, hey, I'm Katrina Zimmerman. I'm currently a senior art director over at Carbon, but I have many years of freelance experience under my belt, and I've been working at Carbon for just under a year.
Cool.
I'm Andrew Maggio. I'm an editor who's found a niche working in motion graphic and VFX workflows. I've been in the business for 19 years. I was full-time for 9 years and now freelance for 10.
Very cool.
My name is Sara Kopke. I am a freelance illustrator and animator. I've been freelance on and off for probably about the 10 years I've been in the industry, with the last 2 years being freelance full-time. Yeah.
Great.
I'm Matt Sackley. I'm a freelance character animator. I've been freelance my whole career, a little over 6 years of it. Yeah, so character animation and previs pretty much is what I do.
Very cool. Thanks, guys. And links to everyone's personal sites will be listed below or in the info section of the platform. So definitely check those out. All of these folks are super talented, and thank you guys again for being here today. So we've got a lot of recent graduates trying to enter the job market right now, people who may be considering going freelance, and also probably current freelancers who are interested in hearing how you all have navigated this so far. So the first question I have, and I'll throw this to Andrew first and then Sara, is, in your opinion, what are some of the pros and cons of being freelance, let's say as opposed to a staff position? Andrew?
I mean, there's a lot of pros. Obviously, I think variety and flexibility are two of the biggest ones. But especially if you're just starting your career, one of the advantages of freelance can be you sort of get trial runs at many different places and studios, working with different clients and people to sort of gauge where you want to fit in and start your career. It's just sort of a good way for companies to get to know you and introduce yourself to them in a sort of project-based way. And it's also a good thing for you to then, sort of decide what your next steps will be, whether you want to continue freelance or if you want to, choose to remain at one of these studios full-time.
Very cool. Yeah, Sara.
Yeah, so there's a lot of pros and there's a few cons. A huge pro is I think it really pushes you to be a better artist because you can simply just not be hired again. that said, you know, people can choose not to bring you back on, and it's easier than firing you. So you always need to be pushing yourself really, really hard, and that can be great. Also, you miss out on some of the culture aspects of being part of a really large company. Being part of a really large company can be great. It can be stressful. You know, there's definitely getting to know the people you work with and having them mentor you. But being freelance, sometimes you can escape that, and that can actually be a stressful situation. And you know, freelancing is kind of a freedom from that if that's not something you enjoy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely true. Katrina, I know that you were freelance and then now you said you're staff at Carbon. What do you find is the big difference?
Well, when I was freelance, I really enjoyed the just crazy amount of hustle that was involved with being a freelancer. Like you really do wear a lot of hats, you know, as far as like being an artist, you know, your own art director, your project manager, your scheduler, your producer. You kind of have to play all these roles. And that was really important to me. And I felt like it really inspired me to keep moving and keep growing. And it's just like the constant hustle was what was my fuel. I realized that by doing that, my work I wasn't producing the work that I wanted to do, just because I was playing all these roles. So when the opportunity at Carbon came up, I just felt it was the right time for me, having all this experience freelancing, to move on and work with a team and get to focus more on the work than the process.
Great. Yeah, interesting. And Ryan, I know you've been in the game for a long time too. What do you think is the best part of freelancing?
Ooh, I mean, to piggyback on what everyone else just said, I mean, you do get a little bit more opportunities to kind of see what is out there. You know, like what does this shop do? What does that shop do? Which then also, you know, you get to play in the sandbox of other great talent. Sometimes when you're full-time at one place and only one place, you really only know what they've presented to you or what happens at that place. So like I've been freelance and full-time in and out, and you know, it's just a great opportunity to kind of, there's like Sara said, there's pros and cons to both, but it's, you know, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, you mentioned that you've been freelance your entire career, right? And with all that experience, like, what do you think is the most challenging aspect of that?
I think for me, well, one, when I was first starting out, it was way more challenging because I didn't have any studio experience. I didn't have any connections really built up other than like classmates and alumni that I had reached out to. But I think the thing that I always kind of just like stress about now is like when you take time off, it seems like that's when all the work wants to come. So it's like that balance of like, I just got to tell myself I'm going to take a vacation or take a week here or something. And I think that's something that when you are a staff artist and you have that allotted vacation time and you're getting paid for it, you know, the balance of have I saved enough money and all this, you know, the logistics of that stuff that you got to always kind of be thinking about more when you're freelancing, I think is something that many freelancers I've talked to are always fighting that battle.
Right, kind of how to achieve that work-life balance when there's so much flowing into each other.
Sure.
I mean, there's a level of like guilt, like he's saying, like of like, oh, I want to take a week off. Oh, now this other shop that I've never worked with wants to reach out and book me, and it sounds like a really cool project. So I'm going to push the vacation or, you know, cancel taking that job. So it's a constant kind of, you have to weigh the pros and cons for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the people who are interested in freelancing, you know, maybe they're new into the industry, what kind of details should they, and Ryan, let's ask you this first. What kind of details should someone consider when they're making a reel or putting together a portfolio?
I mean, put on there what speaks to you and be mindful of what's out there to some degree. you know, some of the bigger shops that have been around for decades might still only have a couple minutes on their reel. So why should a student have like 5, 7, 8 minutes on their reel? You know, it's like, keep it smaller. You know, we know that if you're coming right out of school, you might not have had as much exposure to projects and things like that. So put your best foot forward and keep it short, and maybe save follow-up projects and things like that for when you get that first call or interview. You know, if you put everything online for someone to see, then we can view it and judge it before we call you.
Got it. So you're saying you'd rather have a shorter, stronger reel than just something that's a couple minutes and maybe lets things play out too long.
Yeah, I think shorter is better. And, you know, but even knowing your audience too, like, is this a, you know, is it a recruiter, or is it a supervisor at a shop, or is it just a fellow artist? Like, you know, there's you're going to get different feedback and different thoughts behind that. But if you have a solid 1 minute reel, that's going to be stronger than a solid 1 minute plus 1 minute of filler stuff. So, you know, don't beat yourself up and say, well, this guy who's been doing it for 10 years has way cooler stuff on the reel. Well, that's probably going to be the case.
Right.
But then what do you have that is going to show your best foot forward to give talking points in that interview and to the, you know, the people that are going to be hiring you?
Right. Do you guys feel that for somebody starting out, a minute is kind of good to shoot for, or should they not even be thinking about length and just looking at the strongest moments? Yeah.
Personally, the advice I was always given from my mentors was, it's not so much about the length as it is like, if you only have 1 or 2 really good pieces, that should be what you put on your reel, because they're going to judge you on your worst piece on your reel, not on your best piece, really. So don't put anything on there that you don't think can get you hired with. That was my philosophy when making a reel, at least.
That's good. And question for Katrina. Let's say you have, you know, these pieces assembled. How can you trust that your skills are good enough when you're entering the market? How do you know when you're ready to put it out there?
Right. Well, I would say even if you don't feel like you're ready to put it out there, because you're not going to know unless you like take that next step forward and make mistakes. Like, if you take on a project that's probably bigger than what you can handle, yeah, that's probably going to be really embarrassing for you, but it's something that you're going to learn from. You know, it's not going to keep you up all night, every night, and haunt you. Like, making mistakes and jumping for that next, you know, level is the only way you're going to figure out where you're at and where you need to improve as a freelancer. So yeah, I would just say, like, don't be afraid of like challenging yourself and making mistakes.
Yeah, very cool. And Ryan, I know that you often will hire teams of freelancers for certain projects, and obviously you're looking at their reels and everything. Do people still need to be making resumes? Is that a thing?
Yeah, I would say it's absolutely necessary. I mean, obviously with tools like LinkedIn, that's helpful, and, you know, you have less excuse to kind of stay current of what people are doing. But kind of more in like the formalities and, you know, sometimes in corporate or studio work, we want to know what's on, you know, what your resume is about. And that doesn't necessarily mean job experience related to the industry, but to show that, like, you know, you did this and you did this and you're trying. You know, we've seen people in completely different industries that have a chunk of time on their resume at a completely different field, but that shows that they were dedicated to that craft for a while, and, you know, they're hardworking people, and now they're ready to shift. So it's not going to be held against them, but it's definitely something that does come up, and I would strongly encourage people to keep a resume kind of current in the background.
Right. Both of them. Resume, reel, up to date, looking good. Yeah. And question for Andrew. For people who are entering into freelance, or you guys, how do you set goals for yourself as a freelancer? And for someone starting out, what should their ultimate goal be?
It's a good one. I certainly set goals for myself, even after 10 years. I sort of set long-term goals as well as short-term goals. The long-term goals tend to be a bit more of an annual thing. Things like work I want to be doing, studios or people I want to be working with, and just, how to reach out, make those contacts. And, maybe it's something that's not on my reel and the type of work I want to do more of, trying to get it into that style of work. You definitely don't always attain your goals. A lot of the times, though, that's a good thing, because most of the time, if I'm not achieving, especially personal goals that I set out for myself, which is, learning new skills and things like that, it usually means that I was too busy that year. And so, you also have to give yourself a break when you don't achieve those goals. But the ultimate goal, starting as freelancers, is, we are small businesses. So I would say surviving is one, and making sure that your bills are getting paid and there's some sort of money coming in. But just starting out as well, I think a good goal to have is really just to build that network, and gain experience. And, if you're just starting out, even if you have a great reel, you might not be getting put on, large projects or working with the team. You really just want to sort of get a feel for the business, get a feel for how working with other people in a professional setting works. And the more experience you get in that, and the more success you have in those situations, the more likely you're going to be brought back. And that goes back to then that first goal of surviving and making sure your bills are being paid.
Right, we're all just trying to survive. Absolutely. And building off that for Sara, so I've got my reel. I'm a new freelancer. What kind of jobs should I be looking for as a new entrant?
I think that's a great question. I wish I had someone to tell me how to pick those jobs when I was younger. I'd say stay simple personally. Jobs that aren't too complicated, don't bite off more than you chew. Maybe try working for a production house rather than take on a big client by yourself. Don't work on a 9-minute explainer video. Maybe try some lower thirds, some title cards, something where you're facilitating a senior artist, something where you can kind of focus on the inner workings of being a freelancer before you're trying to become the best animator or designer that there is out there, and kind of learn in a situation where you can still learn from people, because you're not quite the expert yet, because there's going to be a lot of parts of this you're like, yeah, I can do a lower third, no problem, it's going to be easy, but you're not thinking about, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to invoice clients, how you are going to meet these clients' expectations, ways to advertise yourself. You are basically running a really small business, and that's going to be just as hard as animating. So taking on smaller projects and looking at freelancing is another job you're going to also be doing in tandem with this.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, being okay with being in learning mode, especially at the beginning, and not trying to, climb to the top of the mountain immediately on your first job. You want to do a good job, but yeah, perspective. Question for Matt and Ryan, I think too. How do you guys get asked back by clients? You're on there. Do you ask for feedback from your clients? And if so, how do you do that?
So for me, I definitely, when I was just starting out my very first freelance job, it was kind of interesting because it was just with one studio, and it ended up being like 2.5 years of work because it was for a TV series. So I was a freelancer, but it was my only job because it was just so much work. But I made a point to, after every episode that we finished, I would send an email to my animation supervisor, and I was always asking him for, like, how did I do this episode? What can I be improving on? And all sorts of stuff. And he was such a good mentor for me, and he was on the other side of the world, which was crazy too, because it was all remote. And he would send me these great emails back and all sorts of resources. And I think it was just building that relationship with him that I kept getting asked back for more episodes. And that was something that I've tried to continue. I always try to build a relationship with my leads and my supervisors and try to ask them for advice and tips and things like that over the years. And even just outside of work too, just like find common interests that we can talk about, because it's not just about work all the time. So
right, there's a human on the other end.
yeah.
But being able to take some criticism, right, and not necessarily take it personally and be upset about it, but see it as a learning opportunity for moving forward. Yeah, Ryan, what are your thoughts about that? How do you ask for feedback? How do you get
I mean, especially like when you're kind of first starting out, you just graduated, maybe you were the best in your class, or you felt like you were the best in your class. There's a fine line of being confident and arrogant. And like you want to make sure when you're going into these places, you're surrounded probably by people that have been doing it for a lot longer than you. So maybe newer techniques that they don't know, but then I brought a prop. You should still be a sponge and try to absorb as much as you can from the people that you're working with, and learn from them and see how they react to questions from their supervisors and the producers, and learn. Like, I think that's going to be the biggest ticket for getting invited back somewhere to work. I've seen multiple times over the years that sometimes personality and skills, people are going to go with the person with the personality. Just because if you're stuck in a room with someone for 6 months, you want to enjoy that.
Right, especially because we are working so much. You want to enjoy the people you're working with. You want to enjoy the job you're doing. So yeah, I think that's really important. Katrina?
I just wanted to say too, like, and you don't have to have like a big personality, just as long as you are a positive person and just like generally like easy to work with and like just not a mean person.
Be a sponge. Don't be mean.
Well, I mean, to add to that too, it's like, yeah, a lot. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, but more often than not, there are very talented introverts in our industry, and they're not like showboaty, going out type people, but they're extremely nice to work with. They're you don't mind when they're sitting in the room with you, and you can bounce ideas off of them, and they're kind, and we're kind to each other, and that's an important trait that all freelancers starting out should know.
Agree. So as a freelancer starting out and I'm trying to find these people who I want to be working with, how do I do that? And I want to open this up to the group. What's the best way to make initial contacts in the industry, and where do you guys look for jobs? Who wants that one? Yeah, Matt?
So when I was about to graduate, I already knew I was going to be freelance just based on where I was living, and we weren't moving to any big hubs for VFX anytime soon. And so I knew I had to work remotely, and I knew an alumni animator that was doing remote character animation out of Kansas City, which is not a known city for character animation. And he has been doing it forever, and his name's Chris Mayne, by the way. He has an excellent job spreadsheet that I can share with later, but he gave me the advice of how to reach out to people on LinkedIn and just cold introduce yourself and how to do it professionally. And that was my biggest tip to build my network. Was I started about a month before I graduated and just started reaching out to any studio, following studios, and most people didn't respond, but eventually one of those turned into my 2.5-year gig because it was right timing and I had a reel and things like that. So I think
it does work. LinkedIn
does work. A lot of my jobs have come from LinkedIn and reaching out to people, just straight up messaging people. So that was something for me.
Yeah. How did you guys make your initial contacts? Where do you look for jobs?
I'll take one. I mean, I'll definitely reinforce the reach out to people aspect of it. I would say every single one of my jobs in 10 years has come from a referral or somebody that I've worked with at some point directly. I don't think I've gotten one project from LinkedIn. And I'm on LinkedIn. I don't utilize LinkedIn very much. I find sometimes it could feel a little impersonal, the way sometimes people utilize LinkedIn. It almost feels like I get a lot of messages sometimes from other people looking for work, and if it feels like I'm one of 200 people that message got sent to that day, I will certainly ignore it, because it wasn't directed towards me. Whereas if I got a message that was far more personalized and far more directed towards me, somebody genuinely seeking my help on something, I'm far more likely to actually reach out to that person and get back in touch and help them. And I treat my correspondence with people the exact same way, where I tend to reach out to people I have some sort of personal, at least interest in even, and, want to know more about them, want to know more about, what information that they have versus just stock sort of cold call emails.
Yeah, very important. I know Matt mentioned earlier that he had a mentor early on. Show of hands, did any of the rest of you have a mentor early on? Yeah, Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about that experience? Do you think that's important? Do you think you have to have a mentor?
So I went to Columbia College for a degree in illustration, and I took one animation class. And when I graduated, the economy was in rough shape, which I'm sure some of you will be able to relate to very soon. It was extremely hard to find a job. Columbia College had what's like the inverse of a job fair. So instead of you going up to tables that are looking for employees, you are an employee sitting at a table, and employers come up to you. And one of the people that came up to me worked for like a boutique animation house called the Material Group. And they asked me if I'd be interested in doing animation. And I originally wanted to become a traditional animator before I became an illustrator. They meshed well. And so, I just kept on following up with them about it. They showed interest and they came up to me. So it was easy to facilitate that relationship. And I worked with Amador Valenzuela a lot. He probably gave me like 4 years worth of animation knowledge. I kind of learned how to be an animator on the job. So for me, it was invaluable. And back then there weren't, there wasn't School of Motion. There weren't a ton of tutorials outside Grayscale Gorilla. So it was really, really, really important back then. Now I'm not as sure. I think that being mentored is of immense value. I think it's a huge dedication from that mentor, and it's going to be difficult to find from my experience, just because you're asking a lot of that person. If you can find it, 100% do it. But there are other resources now. It's not your only avenue. And I know for a lot of people like editors, maybe someone else can speak to this, but it's pretty much an industry norm. I don't think for 2D animators it's as much of a norm, and I think it definitely depends on the production house.
Right. And this is a good opportunity to do a shout out for the Access VFX website, because there is a big section about mentorship where you can volunteer to be a mentor or find one, which is really, really cool. People from all over the world. So check that out if you're interested in mentorship. Ryan and Katrina, you had some thoughts about mentorship as well.
Yeah.
Take it, Katrina.
Yeah, for sure. I would just say you don't have to like hone in on one person. Feel free to ask questions to anyone and everyone. And that's definitely something that I did. And also, when I first started out, I was working part-time as a hostess, and I would just kind of talk about my interests with people, and eventually it opened up all these like strange avenues I never thought I would like get into. Like when I graduated, I had no idea this industry existed. And like Sarah said, like I didn't really animate that much like in After Effects in college. Like I was never taught like, hey, this is how you network. This is like how you invoice. Like this is the stuff you need to know. So luckily I did get an internship, and I met a bunch of people in the industry through that, and eventually started going to the Chicago Motion Artist Group meetups, which are huge now. And they're such a valuable resource, I think, for new people coming into the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something similar, that when you hear the term mentor and you think of, oh, it's this one person that is sharing all this knowledge to you, but in reality you might have multiple mini mentors or something that like help you out. Like when I went to school for editing and motion graphics, and I had like friends that were already 2 years out that have already been kind of doing it. So probably my initial mentor was my friend who's been doing it for 2 years, and I was like, hey, how did you do that, and what, like, can you help me? And not to take away your business, but like, can you shed some light on that? And then when I segued into VFX, I had a mentor that kind of took me under his wing and taught me everything on the job for 8+ years. So it was, the mentors they're different calibers and different scopes, but you can learn different things from different people.
Right, absolutely. And your mentors can connect you to potential clients. Maybe they'll hire you to work with them on a project, and perhaps even expand your reach into other cities or other markets. Just a quick show of hands, how many of you work in different markets or have worked in different cities? Everybody. Okay. Andrew, how do you break into another market?
For me, I was very fortunate that I had spent 9 years being full-time at a large studio that had offices in other markets, in other cities. And so when I went freelance, I had already sort of established, through cross-pollination of those different offices, a network of people that I knew, that I liked working with. And so for me, when I announced going freelance, it was really just reaching out to some of those people who happen to be in other cities. If you want to work in other markets, especially if you live in a smaller market like Chicago, even a smaller city, the opportunities these days are immense compared to even just 10 years ago. I mean, as an editor, I usually have to get on an airplane and be in that location. But even now, that's becoming less and less, where remote work, especially some of the studios that I've been at, they're far more likely now to say, hey, we've worked with them, we know them, we trust them, and instead of flying them out and having them here, we can just do it from home. But nowadays, as long as you understand the pipelines and people trust you and they know you're going to do the job right, I think there's really no reason to restrict yourself to the market you're in, and you can find a lot of great opportunities, even outside of the larger markets. A lot of the smaller markets in this country have a lot of great work, a lot of great studios, and they tend to need more talent. It's harder for them to find talent in these smaller markets, that if you come along and you say, hey, I'm in city X, but I really like what you guys are doing and I'd love to help out wherever you could, a lot of times you'll get a really good response.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Question for Sara. So we're doing this thing, we're reaching out to people, we're hearing back, we're networking, and people want to work with you and they put you on hold. So the question is, how do you manage your diary or your calendar? Do you go on who's going to give you the most money? Do you go on who has the longest booking? How do you make the determination of what jobs you're going to do?
Okay, so that's probably, honestly, my opinion. For me, the hardest part of freelancing is the whole policies. They're confusing, and I've thought about giving them up completely in the past, but unfortunately, I think they're kind of here to stay. There's the policy that a lot of people do. I don't do this, and I'm given a lot of slack by it by other freelancers, but the hold yourself policy, because then if you hold yourself, no one's going to know, and you can always say, I'll pick, for example, Buck reached out to me and I'm on hold with a couple different freelance houses. You can hold multiple people on second, and then take your dream client, if they call you up, and put them in as your first hold. If they decide to book you. I generally don't do that. I do give out my first hold only to production houses that have booked me a lot, that don't give me a lot of slack when I get booked. Like, they don't try to challenge something and then don't actually book me. or they tend to just, really follow through, treat me well. Give your first hold to people who deserve it. Don't just give it away. And I think if you tell your client you give them first hold, they really do appreciate it. That's something that people don't really talk about. Whereas if you're always giving someone second hold, they are less likely to book you because they're not sure they're going to get you. They're taking a little bit of a risk because they think they're going to have to challenge someone, or someone else is in that first slot, even if it's just you. So that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Right, absolutely, because everybody does it a little bit differently too.
Yeah.
Ryan, how do you handle your calendar bookings and holds and all that?
Well, I mean, the hold game, as Sarah said, is kind of messy. You unfortunately have to kind of play along to some degree, but what works for one person might not work for someone else. So, if you're basically what Sarah just said, those are like the stipulations of the hold game. But if you ever describe the hold game to any other industry, they will look at you with like a deer in headlights, and they say that makes no sense. So not to deflect and push it back on recruiters, but they have some responsibility in the schedulers at these shops to understand that when you put someone on hold for 6 months, that means nothing until you book them. Yes, right. It's like you can give yourself, that opportunity and say, hey, this place wants to put me on hold. Great. But you could sit there for 6 months and not get booked by them. So that is a touchy subject. Sarah raised her hand. You want to continue with that one?
I'll just amend that and say we could probably do an entire video conference on this call. And there was a really great article that came out on Motionographer. I think it's called Please Hold Me or something like that, that just goes into brutal detail of the entire and just analyzes it with a fine-tooth comb. It's really insightful, and it just kind of critiques the whole industry of the hold policies. Everyone's just doing what everyone else is doing, and I think the article is really well written and will give you a lot of insight in how to approach the whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, I just was going to say too, I think the hold system was the biggest new thing to me when I was freelancing, especially when I moved into advertising. When I was doing more television-based work, it was almost like contracts and stuff, and you kind of knew the work was awarded. It wasn't this, we have a project that might award on Friday, and then you might need to start Monday, and you get called at 7 o'clock at night to potentially start the next week. And well, that isn't necessarily super common. It's common enough that you are always kind of thinking about that. And that was something that no one ever explained the hold system to me. And I was so glad when that article was written that now students can I can send this to people that are thinking about freelancing to be read this and really try to understand it, because it's something that's no one really tells you about this when you're thinking about getting into freelancing, at least in my experience.
Right, exactly. And then with dealing with people who are trying to book you, who want to book you, and having this weird kind of stutter step thing happen, that can be tricky. Yeah. Katrina, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to keep in mind that as a freelancer, your time is your business. And when you develop these relationships with studios, you tend to, be a little lax on the hold system. The hold system is there to protect you, and it's there to protect studios as well. You keep people in order based on when they reach out, based on when you are available. But if your studio is gonna book you and they challenge your hold, and you have a relationship with another studio that has you on first hold, you still need to stick to the 24-hour release policy. And when you get into this hold system, there's so many different aspects, as everybody has been saying. It's a little confusing, but there's a part of you that wants to, you put your friendships on, you feel like you put your friendships on the line and your relationship with the studio. But in reality, you just have to remember that this is your business. That's your time.
Right, right. Andrew, you had a point?
Yeah, I was just going to add, to one of the earlier statements as far as balancing creative versus, more lucrative jobs, that in this system, aside from the hold system, that there's been plenty of times, if things have been a little dry for a while, or a job comes up and you take it only for the next day or 2 days later, for a much better, more creative job to come up. And that's just something that is part of freelancing. It's kind of part of business in general, in that you do have to sort of decide on your own what's more important to you at that time. Is it important to take the longer job that might be a little bit more bread and butter work, or is it important to take something that might just be 2 days worth of work, but might be something that is going to look outstanding on your reel? It's a hard thing to balance, and it's something that you never really have to commit to all the time as a freelancer. It's just something that can sort of ebb and flow based on how busy you are and what opportunities you have at the time. But I've certainly missed out on some really cool projects that a lot of times you see them finished and you're like, wow, that turned out really cool. I wish I was able to do that one, but instead I was already booked on this smaller thing. But that's just part of it, and you always have to understand that the larger studios deal with that exact same situation as well.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And as someone who books freelancers, it's always nice to get those personalized notes that you guys had mentioned earlier, where it's like, I really wish I could work with you. I'm sorry, someone else has me on this hold. I have to take it. Please keep me in mind. All of that type of stuff, means something, because that you're being honest, but I'm respecting you as a business person, and you're still trying to establish that connection with me as a client. So yeah. So starting out as a freelancer, how do I get myself set up as a business, you guys? How do I become, and do I need to be an LLC? Matt, how did you do this?
So I still, to this day, am not an actual business. The last 3 years, all the studios I've worked for actually just treat me as like a W-2 employee, which I really like come tax season, because it's so much simpler than the first 3 years when I was working from home and keeping track of receipts and all the extra stuff that comes with that, and especially when you work from home, all the write-offs that you can potentially have. So the last 3 years of my career, I have worked on site for the most part, aside from a stray remote job here and there. And all those studios have brought me on like payroll, essentially as a temporary employee. So I'm probably not the best person in terms of like the LLC side of things, but I would love to hear more.
Yeah, so that's good to know. So you don't necessarily have to set yourself up legally as your own business. You can operate and be you said W-2?
You can, and then some studios will just pay you like 1099, and then at the end of the year when you do your taxes, you can, I think it's like a Schedule C, like self-employment form or something that you fill out, and that you would enter your 1099 tax forms like you would a W-2. And then it might just say like, what's your business name? And you can literally just put your name as your business for those purposes.
Right. And who of you guys has themselves set up as a business, like their own business with a separate entity? Okay, cool. Ryan, why did you do that? And how do you get started doing that? What's the first step to set yourself up as a business?
I mean, there's a lot of layers in there to what Matt was saying. You can do it for various purposes. I mean, I'm not necessarily an individual anymore for that, because I'm running a company. So I had other motives to set up a company for, purposes of that. But even before that, before it was like a company, it was myself and running a business. And to Matt's point, like there's a very difference of knowing W-2s and 1099s. And when in doubt, like if you're just starting off, save all the receipts and know like what something is for. If you're going to a studio and they sign you on as a W-2, then that's a different realm. But if you're at home using your own computer, your own software, and you paid for that, you want to start to have a paper trail of that come tax season. That's like very important. And work with an accountant, because that's their specialty. Like, you can find some that will help, cost wise, that makes sense for people. But I'm sure people have, used parents or family members for advice when they were first starting out, because they're like, I can't afford this or that. What do you have any advice for how to take care of this? And it goes back to the mentorship. Like, ask them, ask people, what have you done to navigate through this?
Right, absolutely. Andrew, you had something to add?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I would definitely reinstate the talk to a CPA. The reasons and the different business classifications sort of vary state by state, depending on state laws. So, there might be some tax advantages to certain classifications in some states, and then you don't get it in the same one. So it's always good to talk to a CPA. One thing overall that I like, and that was actually my initial reasoning for structuring it more as a business, was to really keep the finances separate from my personal sort of bank accounts and finances and things like that. It just made it a little bit easier for me to budget. I think for the first 2 years of freelancing, everything was just kind of going into my personal checking account. And it was sort of hard to say, well, that was just a restaurant I went to, because I was hungry, versus that was a business expense. Same thing with, computer purchases and things like that. Any equipment, software we need to get. It's a lot easier come tax time to just have everything as a separate sort of bank statement, bank account, that all this is our business expenditures. It's way easier to keep track of that, as well as on another advantage is you can get business lines of credit. So if you need a new computer, if you're in the middle of a job and, something fails and you need to run to the Apple store or wherever, you could get a business line of credit. You have a credit card that then, of course, all those payments are, they're coming from part of the business, and everything's being kept separate from your personal accounting.
Right. I think that's really smart. Yeah, Ryan?
I was going to just add to that too, that, when especially if we're talking to people that are coming out of school, maybe starting a business right away is not something they want to do, because you're novice at this industry. You might cut your legs off before you actually have an opportunity, versus like kind of selling yourself as an individual, saying, hey, can I work for you? Hey, can I work for you? Like, and then you basically can get more opportunities, tax stuff aside, but how you're presenting yourself. If you're presenting yourself as a company, you're essentially reaching out and saying, hey, I'm your competitor, hire me. That doesn't necessarily jive with everybody. So, keep that in mind. Some of the stuff that I feel like we're throwing out here is, it's a gray area to kind of understand where the motives and benefits come in play.
Right. Yeah, Andrew?
Just one other quick thing I did want to add, sort of going along with that, is that even now, set up as a business, I still do plenty of work, more along the lines of what Matt was saying, where you come on as a temporary employee, basically, as a studio. Mm-hmm. I still have to be very flexible, and it really doesn't affect things. Some people might not like it if, hey, I'm a business and you gotta, pay me through my business. But for me, I tend to be very flexible and have no problem being a W-2 employee for, a few weeks and then doing more work that comes through my business. It's not a hard line, black and white sort of thing. It's just another way to be flexible.
Right. I think that's a really good note to end on, actually. Be flexible, be a sponge, be nice, ask questions, keep learning. Definitely. I just want to thank all of you guys for sharing your time and your insights with us today. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Katrina. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Matt. And to everyone watching and listening, thank you. For more information, please visit the Access VFX website, where you can find a catalog of podcasts, which are now bi-weekly, a bunch of mentorship information, blogs, and more. So everybody stay well, stay safe. Thanks for listening. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay.